Today, if you look at satellite images of East Asia at night, one thing jumps out immediately. South Korea is glowing. Cities, highways, ports, apartment blocks, factories, neon signs, late night restaurants, all lighting up the bottom half of the Korean peninsula. And then above, almost nothing. North Korea looks like someone turned off the brightness. One peninsula, one people, one shared history stretching back centuries, but today, split into two countries that could not look more different. South Korea is famous for K-pop, Samsung, Korean dramas, beauty products, fried chicken, and people who know how to make airport fashion look like a military operation. North Korea is famous for secrecy, missiles, military parades, prison camps, and a government that treats outside information like a disease. So how did this happen? How does one country become two? Was Korea always divided? Did Koreans vote to split the country in half? No. The split began with a line chosen quickly, a line drawn by outsiders, a line that was meant to be temporary. And like many temporary decisions in history, it somehow became one of the most permanent problems on Earth. To understand how North Korea got split in two, we need to go back to a time when Korea was not ruled by North Korea or South Korea. It was ruled by Japan. From 1910 to 1945, Korea was under Japanese colonial control, and this was not a friendly arrangement. Japan controlled Korea's government, economy, schools, land, police, and public life. Koreans were pressured to use Japanese names. The Korean language was pushed down, Korean culture was restricted. Korean labor and resources were used for Japan's empire. For many Koreans, Japanese rule was not just foreign rule. It was humiliation. It was daily control. It was the feeling that the country had been swallowed. So when World War II started turning against Japan, many Koreans hoped for one thing: liberation, freedom, and a chance to finally get their country back. And in August 1945, that moment came. Japan was collapsing. The United States had dropped atomic bombs on both Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The Soviet Union had entered the war against Japan, and Japanese forces were surrendering all across Asia. After 35 years of colonial rule, Korea was finally free. This should have been a happy ending. The occupation was over, the empire was gone, Koreans could rebuild their country. Except there was one problem. The powerful countries that had defeated Japan had not really figured out what would happen next. And when powerful countries do not have a plan, they often create one very quickly, which is usually where the trouble starts. Korea sat in a dangerous location. It was next to China, it was close to Japan, it bordered Soviet territory, and suddenly, in 1945, both the United States and the Soviet Union cared a lot about what happened there. During World War II, the United States and the Soviet Union were allies, technically. They were both fighting the Germans and Japan, but they were not best friends. They were more like two people doing a group assignment while quietly thinking, I absolutely do not trust this person. The United States was capitalist, the Soviet Union was communist. They both had massive armies, they both wanted influence after the war, and both were already looking at the map and thinking about the next global struggle. That struggle would become the Cold War, and Korea was about to become one of its first victims. As Japan surrendered, Soviet troops moved into northern Korea. The United States wanted Japanese forces in the southern Korea to surrender to American troops, not Soviet troops, but the Americans were far away. The Soviets were already nearby, so American officials needed a quick decision. They needed to decide whether Soviets would accept Japan's surrender and where Americans would accept Japan's surrender. So two American officials looked at a map. They needed a dividing line, fast. They picked the 38th parallel. That is a line of latitude running across the Korean peninsula. It was not chosen because it matched Korean culture. It was not chosen because it separated two different people. It was not chosen because Koreans had asked for it. It was chosen because it roughly cut the peninsula in half, and most importantly for the Americans, it kept Seoul, Korea's capital, in the American zone. That detail was almost unbelievable. A country with centuries of shared history was divided in a hurry by people looking at a map. Imagine someone cuts your house in half because they need to organize who collects the mail, and then years later, everyone acts like the cut was supposed to be there. This is what happened to Korea. At first, this was not supposed to create two separate countries. It was supposed to be temporary. The Soviets would accept Japan's surrender in the north, the Americans would accept Japan's surrender in the south. Then Korea would eventually become independent and unified. That was the plan. Temporary military administration. Then one Korea. Nice and simple. History heard that plan and immediately started laughing, because once Soviet troops entered the north, they began building influence there. And once American troops entered the south, they began building influence there. The line on the map became a line in politics, then a line in daily life, then a line in identity. North of the 38th parallel, the Soviets supported Korean communists. One of the most important figures was Kim Il-sung. He had fought against the Japanese rule and had ties to the Soviet Union. With Soviet backing, he rose to power in the north. South of the 30th parallel, the United States backed anti-communist forces. One of the most important figures was Syngman Rhee. He was a Korean nationalist, strong anti-communist, and very determined to lead Korea, and he was not exactly a gentle democratic teddy bear. So now Korea had two powerful outside forces shaping its future, the Soviet Union in the north and the United States in the south. And for many Koreans, this was bitterly frustrating, because Korea had just been freed from one empire, and now two foreign powers were deciding what came next. There were talks about reunification, there were committees, there were meetings, there were speeches. There were probably enough documents across your desk, but the basic problem was simple. The United States did not want a communist Korea. The Soviet Union did not want an American-friendly Korea. Both sides said they wanted Korea to become independent, but what they really meant was, we want Korea to become independent in a way that helps us. The longer the talks failed, the harder the temporary line became. The families were separated, trade in the north and the south became harder. Political violence increased, and each side claimed to represent the true Korea. The part that matters. Neither side originally said, we're happy with half. Both sides said, we are the real Korea. This was not a peaceful divorce. It was two rival governments saying all of this belongs to us. In 1948, the split became official. In the south, the Republic of Korea was established. That is now South Korea. In the north, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea was established with Kim Il-sung as leader. This is North Korea. And if there's one thing history teaches us, is that when a country puts Democratic People's Republic in the name, you might want to check the fine print. By the end of 1948, Korea had two governments, two armies, two political systems, two foreign backers, and one giant unresolved question. Who gets to rule Korea? The answer came in 1950, and it came with tanks. On June 25, 1950, North Korean forces crossed the 30th parallel and invaded South Korea. The goal was to reunify the peninsula by force under Kim Il-sung's government. At first, North Korea moved fast, very fast. Seoul fell. South Koreans were pushed back, and for a moment it looked like North Korea might win the whole peninsula. Then the United States intervened under the banner of the United Nations. The war turned on. UN forces pushed the North Koreans back, then they crossed the 30th parallel. Then they moved deep into North Korea. Then they got close to China. And China looked at the hostile army approaching its border and basically said, absolutely not. Chinese forces entered the war. Then the war turned again. UN forces were pushed back south. Seoul changed hands multiple times. The front lines moved up and down the peninsula like a deadly tug of war. And the people trapped in the middle paid the price. Cities were bombed, villages were destroyed, families fled, civilians were massacred. Soldiers froze in the winter and died on hills most people today have never heard of. The Korean War is sometimes called the Forgotten War, which is strange because for Koreans there was nothing forgettable about it. It was a national trauma. By 1951, the front line had settled roughly where the division had started, near the 30th parallel. Think about how horrifying that is. After all that movement, after all that destruction, after millions of casualties, the war ended close to where it began, and in 1953 an armistice was signed. An armistice is not the same as a peace treaty. It means the fighting stops. It doesn't mean the war is officially resolved. So the Korean War did not end with a neat final peace agreement. It stopped with a ceasefire, a heavily armed pause. The armistice created the demilitarized zone, usually called the DMZ, and the name demilitarized zone is one of the most misleading names on Earth, because the area around it is one of the most militarized borders in the world. It's like calling a shark tank relaxing fish area. The DMZ became a physical scar across the peninsula. Barbed wire, mines, guard posts, soldiers, watchtowers, a border so tense that even birds crossing it probably feel awkward. And on the other side, two Koreas developed in completely different directions. South Korea was very poor after the war. It was damaged and unstable for decades, but over time it industrialized. Factories grew, exports grew, education expanded, democracy movements pushed against dictatorship, and eventually South Korea became one of the world's major economies and a democracy. North Korea also rebuilt after the war, at first with help from communist allies, but over time it became more isolated. Power passed from Kim Il-sung to his son Kim Jong-il and then to his grandson Kim Jong-un. A communist state became a hereditary dictatorship, which is basically a monarchy wearing a revolutionary jacket. The government controlled speech, movement, information, and loyalty. And while South Korea became globally connected, North Korea became one of the most closed societies on Earth. That is why the satellite images feel so powerful. It's not just about electricity. It's about two systems, two paths, two futures. One peninsula split by a temporary line that hardened into a border. So how did Korea get split in two? Not because Koreans were always divided. Not because the North and South were destined to become enemies. Not because someone carefully designed two separate nations. It happened because Japan's empire collapsed, because the United States and the Soviet Union rushed to manage the surrender, because two officials picked the 30th parallel, because Cold War politics turned temporary occupation into an ideological border, because rival Korean governments each claimed the whole country, because war turned division into blood. Today, the line is still there. Families are still separated. The war is not formally ended by a final peace treaty, and the peninsula remains one of the most tense places on Earth. All because in 1945, as one empire fell, two separate superpowers rose. Someone looked at a map and drew a line that was supposed to make things easier, a line that was supposed to be temporary, a line that became a border, and a border that split a nation in two.